One of my Buddhist teachers said, the price to freedom is eternal vigilance, which I find very daunting. It sounds kind of like almost militaristic, eternal vigilance. It sounds like you're on guard against those bad thoughts or something. In the Bible, it says, pray without ceasing. And there's this wonderful book called The Way of the Pilgrim by a guy named French, which is it's a fictional account that's a very thinly disguised excuse to make a point. And in this book, there's a Russian peasant who's very religious, very devout. And he reads in the Bible where it says, pray without ceasing. And this really bothers him because he has to sleep and he has to work and he has to eat and he has to do all these things where he's not praying. So he's feeling like he's not a very good devotee, if not a very good Christian. What can he do? So the book is he's going all around Russia trying to find wise teachers to explain to him what this Bible verse means. And he's very frustrated because none of these people he meets really knows the answer that satisfies him until finally at the end of the book, he meets a Russian saint, a guy called a starets. That's not a name, it's a title, like priest or something. And what the guy says is that just start saying the Jesus prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. And you just keep saying it, and the prayer will begin to do its own work, and eventually the prayer will say itself. So that even when you're asleep, the prayer will be going on. It's not that you're praying, but that the essence of the prayer will permeate you, it will sink into you, and that you will become that prayer. The prayer will become you, and you're praying without ceasing. And he was really happy, satisfied with his answer. Another one of my favorite quotes is by Saint Teresa of Avila. And she says, the only mistake in prayer is to pray as if God were not present. That's really kind of a mind blower. Living is prayer. And whether it's prayer or mantra, I remember I gave a talk 6 months ago or something. I don't even remember what it's about. And some woman wrote in and complained. And she said, I didn't know this was a Christian group. If I knew it was a Christian group, I wouldn't have come. It's okay. This is not a Christian group, but it's an everything group. And the fact that I'm using the term prayer as opposed to meditation or mantra can be translated in any way that you would like. I mean, I'm certainly not suggesting that prayer is the exclusive purview of Christianity or Judaism. The longer I've been practicing, I really have to confess, I meditate less and I pray more. And I used to be a scientist, so my mind was really very active and acquisitive, and I needed to calm that mind down. I needed to do a lot of meditating to develop mindfulness and concentration and some equanimity. But I have a very difficult time integrating mindfulness into daily activity in the sense of when I'm on the phone, am I mindful of my breath? Am I mindful of my sensations? I find, for me personally, and I'm not saying this is true for you, but for me personally, I find it much juicier, much more compelling. I'm much more attracted to practice when the practice has a deep heart quality to it. We've been exploring a healing paradigm together where the first three chakras are the personal, first, second, and third chakra, having to do with fear, guilt, and shame. Fourth chakra, the heart, is the bridge between the personal and the fifth, sixth, and seventh chakras, which are transpersonal. So beginning to live in the heart is a great idea. All the spiritual traditions talk about it. Certainly, if you're chanting with Jai Uttal, which I did last Sunday night, he's leaving town. We had a big going away party at a local yoga studio. Or if you're into chanting with anybody or finding other ways to express your heart. That's fantastic. But can we then begin to bring this quality of heartfeltness into when you're talking to customer support with Comcast for 2 hours in a row, or when you're cooking your food, or when you're driving in a traffic jam, something like that. Once again, the older I get, the more I find I need to have a practice that draws me rather than something I feel an obligation to do. Buddhism, particularly Tibetan Buddhism, talks a lot about that each of us has a quality of fundamental basic goodness, basic wholeness. And that before we get to the heart, we're often practicing from the standpoint of, I want to get somewhere. My life, my heart, my relationships, my work isn't really satisfying enough. I'm trying to improve myself. But when we dive deeply enough into the heart, we get to this place which we've been calling Tantra, where we're practicing out of richness and abundance and connectedness rather than need and inadequacy and separation. And today I would just like to talk about how to be making that quality of connectedness, of abundance, much more ongoing and constant, rather than something that we have to struggle to find. Now, certainly, as long as fear, guilt, shame, the first 3 chakras, and grief, the 4th chakra, is the enemies of those 4 chakras, fear, guilt, shame, and grief. As long as those are predominating, it's going to be hard to rest in the heart. But I'm just assuming that many people in this room, looking around, I know a lot of you, some of you really well, some of you kind of well, some of you, who the heck are you? But welcome anyway. Okay. That many people in the room have really been practicing a lot. And I think it's easy to get stuck in that place of, well, I'm a kind of okay meditator, but not really great. I don't have time to do long retreats in my life. One tends to judge one's practice. One tends to think of oneself as a kind of a mediocre practitioner. Is there anybody in the room who thinks that you're really a fantastic meditator, that you're, I don't see any arms flying up immediately. To begin to really appreciate that one can be resting in that place moment to moment, going beyond that self-identity of, I'm not very good at this, I have to keep trying really hard. And going back to that St. Teresa of Avila quote, the only mistake in prayer is to pray as if God were not present. What I've been finding, I don't have a lot of fear, guilt, and shame anymore. You can ask Natalie. What I do find is that I have a little bit of OCD sometimes. I like things to look beautiful, that the vase should be in a certain place on the table, not right in the middle. You know, that's too coarse. It's got to be in the place where everything's in balance. And what I try to do then is, when I look at something that doesn't feel quite right, instead of being bothered by it, that's the impulse to go into my mantra. Everything's the impulse to go into my mantra. And whether we're talking about prayer or mantra, I would like to talk today, and I did put in the chat this document, that the essence of prayer, I guess it says, and go through various qualities of prayerfulness or mantra. When we see the different ways of doing this, and how almost every moment, in fact, every moment is open to one of these qualities of prayerfulness, then I think we can be a little more relaxed about trusting that our whole life can be prayerful. And by prayerful, once again, it doesn't mean we have to be precious. doesn't mean we have to be nice all the time. It means that whatever comes out through your heart is whatever is coming out through your heart. I mean, when I'm looking at what's going on politically, I start feeling pretty darn angry. And I think that that's a reasonable spiritual response to what's going on in the world right now. And that one can be angry and engaged and not have your heart be closed, right? So that being prayerful doesn't mean that we're going to be very devout and, oh, yes, I'm not going to bother anybody. Different levels or qualities or types of prayer. The first one is invocation. Invocation is the act of calling upon the presence of the divine. Right off the bat, a big question comes up that if God or the divine or pure consciousness is always available, why do we have to call upon it? So if the nature of the deity is emptiness, why do we pray at all? There seems to me a contradiction here. If God is all over the place, then why do we have to pray? And I'm reminded of this wonderful story where my friend Raghu, who's the executive director of the Love, Serve, Remember Foundation, the group that's carrying on Ram Dass's teachings, he and I were having a business conversation several months ago. And he told me the story. He said that he's got this great house in Ojai. I stayed there last year on my way down to UCLA for my son's graduation. Maybe I guess it was 2 years ago now. He had this wonderful house. It had a big 3-car garage that had been turned into a meditation room and a yoga studio. And there's another outbuilding for his partner's art studio. And he said that he got this email from his landlady saying he had to move out. He was being evicted because the landlady's mortgage company had told her that she owed them a whole bunch of money that she didn't think she owed them, and she didn't have the money, and they were kicking her out of the house. And Raghu was really all bummed out by this because he really loved the place. And a day or two later, he was talking to a friend of ours, Sunanda, who's the bookkeeper for the Love, Serve, Remember Foundation. He told her the story, and she said, well, why don't you write a note to Maharaj-ji and put it under his picture, saying, I really want to keep the house. And Raghu said, well, Maharaj-ji knows about the house already. Why do I have to tell him? Why does he need a note? Right. And Sunanda says, well, Mr. Tiwari, who was a very evolved being, they made a whole movie about Mr. Tiwari. He put notes under the picture to Maharaj-ji, and Siddhi Ma encouraged people to write notes and put them under the picture. So Raghu wrote a note, hey, Maharaj-ji, the house, they're taking away the house. I like the house. And the next day, maybe it was 2 days later, can't remember, he got a note from the landlady saying, the mortgage company just contacted me. They made a mistake. They found the money. You don't have to move out. So I thought, what do I want? It's my first reaction, right? What do I want? And my son, Declan, had just spent his first semester at Yale Divinity School, and he was really unhappy. He was living in this horrible place. It was infested with rodents and insects, and it was like one of the noisiest places you can imagine. There's this super busy street right outside, and somebody played the trumpet in the adjacent apartment, and it was just this horrible place. And it was way far away from all of his classes, and he wasn't meeting anybody. And he liked the school, but he hated being there. So I wrote a little note to Maharaj. I got this picture right here on my desk. There he is. There's the guy, right? And I said, Maharaj, could Declan find some fulfillment and happiness at Yale? And a week later, he writes to me and he says, Dad, most amazing thing, about a week ago, everything changed 180 degrees. It just completely turned around. I got this new place to live. I think I found a girlfriend. I love my new classes. I'm making friends. And then I told this at my small Monday group, and a friend of mine, I said, I know what you're going to ask for, because his husband had lost his job. and had spent 6 months trying to find a job. And I said, not that he's going to find a job, but he's going to find happiness. And my friend wrote a note, put it under Maharaj-ji's picture. And within a few days, his husband was an older guy who was kind of having a hard time finding a job because he was an older guy. He got a job. Now, I'm not saying everybody's going to get exactly what you want here. Maybe if all 40, whatever number here, writes to Maharaj, he's going to say, hey, wait a minute, there's too many of you guys. Kidding. Okay. Invocation, we have to reach out. Just the act of doing that again and again and again, just admitting to yourself that there is that which you trust. Right? I mean, you wouldn't be in this room here together if you didn't trust at some level that there is God, or there is a level of consciousness, or there is a higher power, or there is a sense of yourself that is whole and is always there. And that, yeah, we have personalities and we get lost in the personality stuff, and look what's happening to the planet, and look what Trump is doing, and look at all this stuff. All that is true. But when we're relating to it from this place of we've invoked, we are resting in a sense of wholeness, then the anger about the politics or the anxiety about the climate change or whatever is coming up is being experienced in a very, very different way. It's the nature of human existence that things at one and the same time are always completely out of balance, and they're in balance at the same time. As weird as it looks out there, this is the way it's supposed to be. It doesn't mean we don't try to change it. Prayer is an essential part of that process, this invoking. Whenever you find yourself doubting that it's okay, that you can surrender into this moment, then you can invoke. You can metaphorically write that note and put it under the metaphorical photograph of whoever you have a photograph of or a non-photograph, and ask. The second kind of prayer is adoration. In Orthodox Christianity, they talk about dropping the mind into the heart. You still have a mind. You still have to do your taxes and write your shopping list and figure out what you're going to do tomorrow or whatever. But the thoughts, the actions are suffused with the heart. Your adoration is expressing love, reverence, and awe toward the divine, simply for what it is, not having to do with all it looks this way or that way, but just the way it is. A prayer of rejoicing, which is very similar to another quality of a prayer of thanksgiving or gratitude. There's so many teachers that say if there's just one spiritual practice you have in your life, make it gratitude. Can you be grateful for even this? Brene Brown, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, at one point she had the first or second most popular TED Talk ever, is a sociology professor at University of Texas, Austin. And she had what she called 14,000 data points, which I assume are people. And she had questionnaires, surveys with 14,000 people. And she said that every person in that group that reported that they felt joy, everyone had a gratitude practice. That without gratitude, you're not going to feel joy. Now, I think there's this kind of corny thing of every night you write down 3 things you're grateful for. The car didn't break down today, and the Giants won, and whatever else happened, right? But can gratitude be an attitude? Can we be grateful right now for this moment? That you've got a body that's strong enough to be sitting here and listening to what's going on, and we're connected in some virtual way here, and it's this loving community. There's plenty to be grateful for, no matter how strange or weird things seem to be. My first guru, Bob Dylan, said, "He not busy being born is busy dying." right? So we have a choice. Are you going to be busy being born, or are you going to be busy dying? Eckhart Tolle says, it is through gratitude for the present moment that the spiritual dimension of life opens up. Joanna Macy, who just died a few weeks ago, remarkable human being. Gratitude is liberating. It is subversive. It helps us realize that we are sufficient, and that realization frees us. We are sufficient. Rumi, giving thanks for abundance is sweeter than the abundance itself. Meister Eckhart, if the only prayer you say in your life is thank you, it will be enough. I live in Marin. There's a beautiful mountain right outside my window. I've got a lovely partner. I've got a lovely house. I've got a lovely son. My body's healthy at this age that I'm at. Plenty to be grateful for. But I would hope that if I had some life-threatening illness and I were living in a not so beautiful place, I could still be grateful. It's a practice. Another kind of prayer is prayer of confession, basically self-forgiveness. It's very difficult to open the heart in the ways that we've just been talking about, if in fact we haven't admitted, which is kind of like a mindfulness thing, your fear, your guilt, your shame, your anger. If you're using prayer to try to suppress these things, it's not going to work. Prayer mantra is not about suppression. So we need to be humble and vulnerable in a way that clears the heart, allowing forgiveness, purification, and the restoration of alignment with the sacred. We move on to the prayer of intercession, praying for other people. Here's where I find things start getting really interesting in the way that I'm about to describe. So suppose my son is having a hard time, and I feel I would like to pray that God takes care of Declan. Or suppose I have a client. Right now I have several clients who have serious medical conditions, and I think about them. I feel them quite regularly. In Buddhism, they say very, very clearly, Tibetan Buddhism in particular, that cultivating bodhicitta, cultivating a warm heart, cultivating compassion is a completely necessary prerequisite for enlightenment. That until we can feel the suffering of other human beings, as long as we're pushing it away or we're getting lost in it, until we can feel with an open, balanced heart the suffering of children in Gaza and Donald Trump and Pam Bondi and Vladimir Putin and your neighbor and all these other people, until we can feel their suffering, we're not going to be free. Being able to be touched by the suffering of other people and still be prayerful, not have to close our hearts. Chagdud Tulku, a wonderful, wonderful Lama who died a few years ago, he said, we pray for what's best, not only for ourselves, but for all beings. With proper motivation, prayer becomes an important component of our practice because it helps to remove obstacles, counterproductive circumstances, imbalances of the subtle energies in the body, confusion and ignorance in the mind. We're going to go beyond intercession soon to prayers that are resting in wholeness. There's one level of prayer here where we're actually focusing on what's broken and hoping that it changes. There's going to be a deeper level of prayer where we know that even the brokenness is wholeness. And we're not focusing on the brokenness. We're not focusing even on the person, but we're focusing on the wholeness. But in that quote that I just read, where he talks about imbalances of the subtle energy in the body. I've been feeling, maybe because my birthday's coming or maybe because of things going on in my life, that I'm really interested in purifying so that all these teachings I know so well are alive in me, right? I've been a very, how can I say this? Not lazy isn't quite the right word, but kind of a rogue practitioner. I will do or say just about anything if I feel like that's what I want to do. Intercession, praying for other people, and then petition, praying for yourself, praying for guidance. I have a hard time praying for more money or more this or more that, but at times I've been willing to pray for help me see what I need to do next. Praying for guidance. In Psalms, the psalmist says, "Save me, O God, by thy name," getting direction. And then finally, not finally, but almost finally, moving on to contemplation, silent prayer, receptive form of communion with the divine, in which words fall away. So that in many traditions, Buddhism, Christianity, primarily is what I've focused on, that in the beginning and intermediate stages of practice, there are a lot of prayers. And yet, eventually, those same prayers can be done from a place of emptiness, of quiet mind. Initially, you're saying the prayers to purify the mind. But as you go more deeply into it, the practice itself purifies the mind. Every day I go out and get 2 flowers from, I don't really have a garden, but there are flowers growing where I live here all over the place. And I bring them into my 2 little altars here, and I put the flowers down, I wave some incense. And sometimes when I'm waving the incense in front of, there's Maharaj-ji and Hanuman and Kali and Shiva and Mother Mary and Jesus and other beings there behind me. When I wave these things, I'm in my mind thinking, oh, I love you. But a lot of times there's nothing in my mind. It's just there's incense waving going on. And it's not, there's a God out there that's better than me that I am honoring. It just says, in fact, Suzuki Roshi has this wonderful quote where he says, in Buddhism, when we bow, we let go of any notion that I am bowing to Buddha, that Buddha is not outside. All that's going on is bowing. All that's going on is praying. We're not praying to something that's out there, right? That the mind is completely empty of separation, if you will, that the prayer itself is taking us to that kind of sense of connectedness even. Many teachers that I went to when I was in the habit of collecting teachers long ago, I would ask the question, if I had a good friend who were dying and my friend had never meditated and they were very afraid, what would the best thing be that I could do for that person? And almost all of them said something like, merge your mind with the one mind and merge your mind with the mind of your friend. Don't focus on their cancer, if that's what the case is. Don't focus on them as an individual human being, but focus on the delusion of separateness. You go into beyond separateness, you go into wholeness, you go into this contemplation of empty wholeness, and then you're there with them. And one of my favorite practices is when I go to bed at night, I start saying my mantra, I go into this prayerful place, and then I just ask, who are the people in my life that, how can I say this exactly? Who are the people in my life that come to my mind right now? I'm not saying, well, I've got to think about Declan because he's off at Yale or whatever like that. It's just somebody's name pops up and I think of John McNally off on camping. Did he remember his medicine or not? Right? Or I think of John. Is he ever going to get a job? Right. I'm really not thinking about the job or about the medicine. feel my wholeness, and I feel you. And then I get quiet, and then the next name pops into my heart. And then I think about that person. I'm not trying to fix anybody. I'm not trying to heal anybody. I'm not saying I'm a healer or I'm better than anybody, but I'm just feeling that if I can be in my wholeness and I can be with that other being, that any healing that might want to happen that's being blocked by too many opinions floating around is probably going to happen then, right? I'm not doing it, but I'm kind of helping us all get out of the way in that particular instance. Okay, so then there's the prayer of meditation, where we do contemplation was silent, receptive communion with the divine. Meditation is more saying a mantra, scriptures, saying a prayer, and using mantra to release yourself into pure consciousness. I, not the eyeball, but I is the original name. You can ask, who is this I? You can even use prayer as a way of entry into the non-dual. Muhammad says, heaven and earth contain me not, but the heart of my faithful servant contains me. And as part of that practice I was just mentioning, I really like to say prayer and mantra focusing on my heart center. Sometimes I feel it on the left side, sometimes the right side, sometimes the center. In Sufism, there are different heart centers. They mean different things. These arise naturally. You don't have to worry about all the details, but where do you feel? And where do you feel the heart? And when I start saying my mantra and I bring my attention to my chest, there's often a pain. It's a good pain. It's a pain of release. It's not the pain of stubbing your toe. It's the pain of releasing tension, of a closed door creaking open, if you will. It's a pain of release. And then prayer of dedication, offering. In the Bhagavad Gita, my favorite part of the Bhagavad Gita is in chapter 12, verses 8 to 12. I feel like a minister now. Our reading for the day, ladies and gentlemen, is a Bhagavad Gita, chapter 12. And it's the chapter on the yoga of devotion. And Krishna says, set your heart on me alone. Give to me your understanding. Then you shall live in truth in me hereafter. But if you are not able to rest your mind on me, then seek to reach me by the practice of concentration. If you are not able to practice concentration, consecrate all your work to me by merely doing actions in my service. You shall then attain perfection. And if you're not able even to do this, then take refuge in devotion to me and surrender to me the fruits of all your work with the selfless devotion of a humble heart. So if you can't remember God as you're doing your work, then when you're done with it, it's just devote it to him then or her. So, and he concludes by saying, for concentration is better than mere practice, and meditation is better than concentration. But higher than meditation is surrender in love of the fruits of one's actions, for on surrender follows peace. Prayer of dedication. Very often in Buddhism, after or at the beginning, depending of a meditation, we dedicate the fruits of our actions so that all beings might be free. We're not practicing for ourselves, we're practicing for all beings. And then finally, prayer of lamentation, where we express our grief, sorrow, or anguish toward the divine. The wonderful writer and teacher Francis Weller says, grief and love are sisters, woven together from the beginning. Their kinship reminds us there is no love that does not contain loss, and no loss that is not a reminder of the love we carry for what we once held close. So being able to be prayerful in the midst of grief, in the midst of loss, in the midst of sorrow, Grief is love in another form. Unresolved grief has a numbing effect. These effects tend to accumulate and block the free expression of the heart. So being able to pray when we're in the midst of grief, when we feel lost. And there's this wonderful quote by Thomas Merton where he says, or this is my upgrade of his quote, love and prayer are learned in the hour when prayer becomes impossible and the heart turns to stone. Love and prayer are learned in the hour when prayer becomes impossible and the heart turns to stone. I will leave it at that. Many kinds of prayer. The summary here is that every moment is open to one of these kinds of prayer. And how much can we trust integrating a prayerful attitude, a heartfelt surrender into the divine attitude in each moment, no matter whether it's a moment of gratitude or a moment of grief or a moment of intercession or a moment of thanksgiving, on and on and on. So many different possibilities. Thank you very much. Comments or questions?
Hi, Dale. Hi, everybody. Something I'm struggling with right now is trust, like trust in self, trust in what is unfolding. Right? Ambiguity is difficult for me. And it feels like that feels related to prayer and like trust in what is greater. And so I'm just curious if there's any words of wisdom you have around trust and in that like learning to, accept in the first step of 12 steps, right? Except I'm powerless, right? I am both divine and powerless. And anything about that?
Yeah, that's a big question. It's a great question. And it's harder to trust when things in your life don't make sense or they're very painful, as I know they are for you right now. And trust, faith, kind of same thing. My experience is that deepens and is experienced through direct experience. It's not like belief. It's not a mind thing. So even though you're going through a very challenging emotional part of your journey, trust can deepen, trust can be felt when not in spite of, but in the midst of, maybe even because of the turbulence, there's something that you can directly, nakedly experience that is not being buffeted about by content, right? And it's difficult because it's not a thing. It's not like your breath or, some kind of sensation you have. It's a much more subtle thing that we have trust in. I think it was Maya Angelou who said, people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget the way they made you feel. You made them feel. And it's kind of that same thing. I mean, is there something that doesn't change when everything else is changing? Is there some solid ground, which kind of gives the wrong impression because it's very unsolid, but maybe let's not use solid ground, but is there something immutable that is always present that we often lose touch with because of our fixation on and our reactions to what is changing? To me, that trust is largely learned by being around people who have it. It's not going to come out of reading a book. It's not going to come out. It can come out of solitude and being forced to look in the cosmic mirror, I guess. But the easiest way certainly is to be around people who have gone through the fire themselves and have some deep trust themselves, some deep connection with something that's universal. So certainly in this day and age, a lot of people don't have a teacher that they can go to. And Nadahan said something like, in this day and age, the Sangha has become the Buddha, right? That maybe you can trust the feeling that you get when we're all here together. That not just me, but the 45 people who are here today or something, that there's some kind of collective support and wisdom that's always available. And that, you know, like behind me are deities and teachers that I have been with, and they have teachers, and there's this lineage that's supporting me and supporting us, and people in the room have their own lineage, and all that is funneling down into this moment here. That's my best answer. Good luck.
Thank you. It's a good one.
I think it'll get a lot better. Easier.